All right. Facebook's oversight board announcing this morning the 45th president of the United States, Donald Trump, is still banned from one of the world's most popular social media platforms. This coming as Mr. Trump officially reveals his own platform of sorts yesterday. It's called From the Desk of Donald J. Trump. Take a look at what they did put out.
Him and those who supported him in the Senate to the trash heap of history.
Twitter permanently banning the commander-in-chief's personal account with 88 million followers.
All right, the so-called platform, it may become more of a big, broader effort by Mr. Trump to expand into a fuller, more functional social media outlet. But the oversight board of Facebook did not make a decision about a permanent ban on Trump. They left that to Mark Zuckerberg, who's going to win that social media battle. Derek, I wanted to bring you in. What's your assessment of what is going on here?
Well, one, I think it's a classic case of how law always lags behind the actual activity that we need to govern. The second thing is no company should be able to wield this much power, and unfortunately Facebook does. And it's almost like, you know, the First Amendment is protected against government intrusion, but it does not protect against an outside entity like Facebook. And unfortunately, they have too much power, and there's been a lot of talk about, you know, a lot of regulations in terms of trying to restrict what they do. But unfortunately, Facebook, Twitter, and these online media, social media giants, they just have entirely too much power. And to be able to tell the former president of the United States that he's not allowed to speak to his audience, it's just insane right now. And I think something needs to be done about Facebook and the rest of these social media giant companies.
Yeah, so Chuck Smith, former U.S. attorney, special assistant, you're a law guy. What can be done here that is reasonable? Everybody says, well, the First Amendment doesn't apply to private business. We all know that. But it seems like something could be done to ensure fairness on what are behemoths when it comes to tech.
I totally agree. You know, the First Amendment may not apply to private businesses, but every other amendment applies to private businesses. You can't violate someone's Fourth Amendment equal protection of the rights or equal protection of rights, whether you are a government agency or private businesses. They regulate bakeries. They're pushing back, you know, against the religious freedom. So I think we need to regulate these giant companies the same way we regulate utilities. We need to hold them accountable just as we do governments.
Yeah, Heather, it seems like there are a lot of things that need to be answered here. But you wonder if the government, by that I mean the Biden administration and the Democratic Congress, has the incentive or interest in actually changing what's going on.
I don't think they have the incentive or the interest right now because their interests are not being censored. But as I had said earlier, you know, right now it happens to be conservative voices that are being censored, but it could change on a dime.
Yes.
And next week it could be liberals and Democrats who are being censored. So I think it's a very, very important conversation to have, and that something needs to be done about it, especially when you have the former president of the United States not having an avenue to really get his message out. Now, Twitter and Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp.
Well, I don't forecast it will ever be liberals because this is right up their alley, and they're the ones that are enabling all of these companies. What's so tragic about this is when we did have a majority in the Senate that we were never able to make some modifications to the Section 230, which allows them the right to not be liable for any speech issues. But yet they're trying to fall under the publisher category where they are limiting free speech because they're acting as if they are liable. They're trying to play both sides of the coin here, and they've never been held accountable. It's only going to get worse. And if it comes down to Mark Zuckerberg, it doesn't take much to look up his history on donating to Democratic causes. The last election, it was millions upon millions of dollars that he influenced in supporting elections for Democratic candidates. So I think that we're not going to see a fair trial, so to speak, by Facebook ever when it comes to the president of the United States. The president has called them out, and they don't like it. And it's despicable in the country country that has established a constitution for freedom of speech is now censoring speech. It's just tragic.
Yeah, and it seems like the former president, shouldn't be forced to create his own platform and to get his word out there. Chuck, I wanted to ask you, this is a wild card. It's just something I've thought about. In the financial industry, there's a quiet period before earnings are announced that heads of companies can't really talk about anything. They don't want to influence the stock price. Is there any possibility there could be like a quiet period, 30 days or 60 days leading up to an election? In media, they will not take advertising for the candidates, and I mean, Democrat, because their concern appears to be that the wrong messages are getting out there. Is that any kind of solution here? Could anything like that actually happen?
Well, I agree with the last guest. I'm not sure this new woke Democrat is going to be receptive to anything that diminishes this quote unquote new power that they have. I think there was a time when we could have done things as Republicans when we had control. But right now, I think it's going to depend on who we elect to office. No, I do. Although I think it's a good idea, I don't think they're going to be receptive to that.
Yeah, Derek, your thoughts on it?
I was just going to say, even with Facebook, their review panel was made up of 20 journalists and 20 activists and a couple of former politicians. And I can't imagine any of those individuals were conservatives. So as long as the boards are set up that way, I don't think we're going to ever see any kind of end to this, what these social media giants are doing.
Heather, doesn't sound like it.
Yeah, no, 95% were anti-Trump, verbally so, publicly, and then 3/4 of them were non-U.S. citizens. So we'll see what happens in 6 months if they decide at that point to reinstate President Trump. But then there's a question, does he even want to go back on that platform? I can't remember the last time I was on Facebook.
Well, I think that is a good point, because he actually would advertise on Facebook, but that's not where he got his voice out there. His message was out there on Twitter more often, and that's the kind of platform he probably would like to utilize. And the same conversation could then go onto Twitter, which we could have another day until this issue gets solved, because it really hasn't been at this point.
On the day, Heather, that we celebrate Mexican freedom, America loses a little chunk of our First Amendment freedoms. And allow me to explain. A lot of people are saying, Bowling, you don't understand the First Amendment if you don't understand that companies can do what they want to do or not what they want to do. And I agree. I'm a free marketeer. I'm a libertarian who agrees that Facebook has the right to do what they did today. Now, let me qualify that with, if they're going to do that, then they need to act in the free market world and not abide by or not use the protections of Section 230. Section 230 is a very important rule that allows big companies, like big tech companies like Facebook, like Apple, like Twitter, to hide behind a wall of immunity from prosecution. What I mean there is, if someone puts something damaging or something that causes violence or destruction on these social media platforms, the other companies, the aggrieved party, cannot go after Facebook or Twitter because it's called Section 230. It creates a firewall of litigation between them and what these people put out. They can't be in charge of knowing everything that goes on. Now, if they want that Section 230 wall, that firewall, that immunity, and that antitrust immunity, then they can't do what they did with Donald Trump. Then they can't say, you know what, we don't like these people's or this group's speech, specifically Donald Trump and conservatives, and therefore we're going to deplatform them. They can't pick and choose. They can't administer it in a biased manner, because that's anti-American, administering bias. You want to be the free market and you want to play by that rule, that's fine. But don't use the American court system to hide behind the rule, Section 230. It's a very, very important distinction.
So what do you think is going to happen?
Well, what they did was the oversight board at Facebook kicked it down 6 months. And I believe because it's a liberal, the big tech is between the big tech and the left, they're attacking the free market and free speech. I believe in 6 months, when they revisit this, Facebook, they will go ahead and deplatform Donald Trump. And that's a real loss. That's a loss for Trump, certainly, because I think in order for him to win in 2024, he'll need Facebook, he'll need Twitter, he'll need all of those. He needs to be replatformed by them. But I think it's a loss for conservatives. Just on my own personal accounts on Twitter, I lost somewhere around 200,000 followers. I've lost 20%. I had 1.4 million. I'm down to 1.1. It's just, but for them to pick and choose and target conservatives, it's a loss for the American people and the free speech, the First Amendment free speech, free marketeers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a loss not only for conservatives but also for liberals, because today they may be censoring conservatives, but tomorrow it could be someone else with a different viewpoint that, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and his panel of experts who don't even live in this country disagree with. But I get stuck when I think about Facebook being a private business, you know, and government overreach and the government trying to step in and tell someone what they should or should not do with their business. So explain to folks why this is a little bit different, because it's a public square and all of that.
Right, because I agree with you, Heather, because we're free market people. We say let these companies do what they do to make a living, and you want to choose who you allow in your store or who you allow to post on Facebook or Twitter. That's your choice. You know, live and die by that choice, so to speak. But again, that's why I brought up that Section 230, because they're doing that, because they want to say you can play with us and you can't, or you can use our service and you can't. They're choosing. They're being biased in how they pick it. Therefore, they cannot use the American court system, which is unbiased. It should be not biased in any left or right, black or white, in any way, shape, or form. They're using that Section 230 very, very aggressively. They're becoming bigger and bigger. Facebook is almost $1 trillion. Apple is $2 trillion. These are mega big tech companies who hide behind 230, not only with litigation, but also antitrust as well. They're allowed to get this big because they're some sort of providing some sort of service. But when it becomes biased, again, this is the important distinction here, is when Facebook decides what can go on their platform, they've gone from a strict bulletin board, so to speak, to a media entity. Now, Newsmax, New York Times, other media entities are bound by certain rules and regulations of what they can and can't do. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the like are not bound by those because of that Section 230. You want to remove Section 230? Have at it. Then do what the heck you want. We know New York Times leans left. We know that. We know that's going to get MSNBC, CNN. They're all going to be left. They won't put conservatives on there. I get it, but you're allowed to do that but there's no Section 230 firewall for MSNBC, New York Times, and the like.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, where real news for real people.